Having one of the top receivers in the game can absolutely help you win a championship in fantasy football. Who is the top wide receiver going to be this year, and who are even the candidates? Let's find out. Let's start with the front runners. If you've been in any fantasy football draft, especially a mock draft that we've done throughout the entire offseason, you know who the 1.1 is. It's Justin Jefferson. I think it's pretty obvious what the case is for him. So I guess I'll just ask you this, Chris, is JJ going to repeat?
I can't make an argument against them. I mean, the guy's just gotten better every year of his career. It's like as a rookie, it's like he can't get better. Then as a sophomore, it's like he can't get better. And then last year, it's like, who knows when this guy will finally not be able to get better. But you can't really bet against him. It's ridiculous. The guy has been unbelievable. Cannot make a case against him as the wide receiver one.
Only possible thing I could think of is maybe the addition of Jordan Addison. More targets go his way. That's not going to really stop Jefferson, is it? And, you don't want to throw out the comparisons to greats, and he's still so early in his career, but he has to remind you of Jay Rice in the sense that nobody saw this coming. People didn't think he was going to dominate this much, and he doesn't stand out because of his size or his amazing speed. He's just a great technician. He's got amazing hands. He just does everything right. So there's no reason to argue against him. But we have a really strong contender, a guy who could definitely take the mantle because he's really close. He just needs to stay healthy, and that's Jamar Chase. So if he stays on the field, and I guess if Joe Burrow is on the field for the entire season and doesn't just show up in week 5 like Chase wants, is it possible that Chase takes over?
Yeah, Chase kind of feels like the CMC of wide receivers in the sense that it's like he just needs to stay healthy. We know this guy's weekly upside. We know what he can do. So if we get this guy over a full 17 games healthy with a full Joe Burrow healthy, absolutely has a case to perhaps be the wide receiver one this year. So definitely has a chance.
His injury from last year doesn't worry me. That's all done in the past, right? He recovered pretty quickly. The Burrow thing might be concerning if he really does miss games. But even so, Chase is pretty much quarterback proof, I think. I don't feel as good about him. I'm not taking him at number 1 over Jefferson, but I guess I could see why you would. But hold up, here's somebody else who has just as strong a case because he was the number 1 guy before last year. We remember Cooper Kupp, his historic season. Well, it was him and Stafford both hurt at the same time. If they're both good to go, do you think he regains his form? Maybe he takes over that spot again.
I mean, another guy you can't really make a case against him. You look at every game he's played with Matthew Stafford, even including the playoffs, he's only gone under 16 PPR points one time. That is insane. Like 16 PPR points is like basically your worst game. So as long as he stays healthy, as long as Stafford stays healthy, he certainly has a case. I do wonder if the ceiling that we saw 2 years ago is there enough for him to be the wide receiver one. But man, with his weekly floor, he might just be able to outpoint these guys all season. So can't really make a case against him either.
Kind of say the same thing I said about Chase. It's not his injury from last year I'm worried about. It's the quarterback with Stafford. We're hearing he's healthier than he's been in forever. Last year, they kind of saw it coming, right? All offseason, we heard about the elbow and he was having injury, issues. And then, of course, got shut down. It was a disaster for the Rams. Look, if Stafford's good to go and Kupp's good to go, I mean, he's got to be at least up there. It's almost like a 1A, 1B, 1C situation, but I'm really not sure who's B or C at this point. Maybe we should have Kupp ahead of Chase. I don't know, but all 3 of these guys have a clear path. And then one more front runner. We can't rule out Tyreek Hill. First year with the Dolphins, we saw what happened. So again, if Tua is healthy all year, do you think Hill maybe gets that 2,000-yard mark that he's talked about wanting to get to?
I doubt it. This is such a huge number, but we saw last year. I mean, remember, he was kind of pacing right there with Justin Jefferson when Tua was healthy. I mean, putting up the same kind of monster games that Jefferson was. So I certainly think he has a legitimate case. Again, I guess like you said about Chase and Kupp so far, it comes down to not does Tyreek Hill stay healthy, but does Tua stay healthy and on the field. But if he does, Tyreek Hill has incredible upside. He could, like 2,000 yards. If I had to pick a receiver to go for 2,000 yards this year, it probably would be him because he's one of those guys who just can just pick up huge amount of yardage every time the ball's in his hand. So another guy for me, I can't really make a case against him as the wide receiver one.
Some things people might not realize, some people concerned about going away from Kansas City and Pat Mahomes. Well, Tyreek Hill averaged his highest yards per game average, cracked 100 yards per game, had his highest yardage total of his career in Miami, and that was without Tua for several games. I mean, I think it's possible. I mean, sure, you can say I'm biased or whatever, but look at the numbers. Had his best year yet with a backup quarterback for several games. Definitely doable. Now, the next group, these are guys who are strong contenders, maybe haven't quite gotten to that level, haven't been that top dog yet, but could do it. And let's start with CeeDee Lamb, guy you know that we both think could have his best year yet, but does that mean surpassing those front runners?
I mean, it's hard to sit here right now and say he's going to score more points than those four guys, but I certainly think it's a possibility because you look at last year, wide receiver 4 with Dak Prescott really barely finished behind Jefferson, Adams, and Tyreek Hill. Now going into this new system, I love this new system for CeeDee Lamb because unlike last year, where basically everything is like you catch the ball and then you get tackled, now it's going to be like you catch the ball and you're in space and you can go running forever after the catch, which you couldn't do last year. So I think CeeDee Lamb, also he's entering his prime, right? This is like wide receiver prime years. I think we see an even better CeeDee Lamb. So obviously not to the degree of the first four guys we talked about, but certainly outside of those guys, he's probably my next logical candidate.
I agree. And, this is a guy who every year of his career has trended up, increased his receptions and yardage per game. And it's easy to just forget he got off to a slow start this first few weeks of the season because Cooper Rush was the quarterback. And they got by fine and they won, so people forgot. But in fantasy, remember, there was a little bit of early panic about CeeDee Lamb because he wasn't putting up elite numbers, through week 3 or whatever it was. I mean, he could have had an even better season. He could have an even bigger season this year, so it's not out of reach. Now, let's get to Stephon Diggs, a guy who was in the news a little bit here and there offseason, not for good reasons. Maybe some sort of a rift with the coaching staff or Josh Allen or whatever, and also not the youngest player on this list so far. So is there still a way that he can be just as good or better?
I mean, I don't know. Probably not. It's a stretch to see him as the wide receiver 1. I mean, 2 years ago, led the league in receptions and yards and still wasn't the wide receiver 1 that year. He just doesn't get that touchdown total. Even though you think like in this offense, he should have tons of touchdowns. Josh Allen spreads it out, throws the tight ends in the red zone, throws to random guys in the red zone, runs for touchdowns. I think Stephon Diggs will be good. He'll probably be a top 5 wide receiver once again, but wide receiver 1 feels like his upper ceiling. So there's a chance, but not one of my favorites to do it.
Yeah, you get the feeling this Buffalo offense, they kind of want to diversify a little bit. They didn't really bring in much personnel to do it. They got a rookie tight end. That's kind of it. No big name wide receivers. No, addition that's going to threaten Diggs' target volume. But yeah, I feel like that's why Diggs kind of had some issues this, preseason because he wants to be the focal point of the entire offense. And, maybe new OC Ken Dorsey and the coaching staff are like, yeah, we kind of need to do some other things here. I think Diggs will be solid. He'll be probably right in line with what he's done the last couple of years, but I don't see any way that he really improves on those numbers. And what about A.J. Brown? This Eagles offense already one of the best in the leagues. Is it possible that Jalen Hurts takes another step forward in his progression as elite quarterback? And does that mean A.J. Brown could put up even better numbers?
I think A.J. Brown could definitely put up better numbers, but wide receiver 1 numbers, that's going to be tough because they have another really good alpha wide receiver in Devonta Smith. They have a great tight end in Dallas Goedert. He's going to need close to 20 touchdowns, kind of like what we saw from Devontae Adams a few years back when he had like 17 touchdowns. I realize Devontae Adams also had a ton of catches, a ton of yards that year, but for A.J. Brown to do it, because he's not going to be a guy who's going to catch 110, 120 passes, because there's too much competition here, and they're not going to be a team that's going to throw it enough, but he's going to need to get probably 15 to 20 touchdowns to even have a chance. So great player. Think he's going to be fantastic, but wide receiver 1 feels like a stretch.
I'm just going to call it now. I don't see it happening for him. Great player, but there's too many weapons on that offense, like you said. And what I've been saying is it wouldn't surprise me if Devontae Smith, who coming forward in his 3rd season now, if he matches or even surpasses A.J. Brown as the best receiver on that team. I mean, it doesn't really matter who you consider the number one receiver or whatever, but I don't think A.J. Brown is going to top what he did last year. I think he's a lock as a top 10 receiver if he's healthy, but that's as high as I'll go. All right, everyone's been waiting for this. It's Sun God time. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a stud. He wants everybody to know that. Had a great year. Could he do even better? And what is his ceiling, really?
I definitely think he can do better, but again, I don't see wide receiver one outcome, namely because of the yardage and the touchdowns. His role as a receiver is just not the type of role that's going to ever get, 14, 15, 1,600 yards unless he has just a crazy yard after catch season, more than likely. And even though I do expect him to score more touchdowns this year, he got tackled at the 1 yard line like 7 times last year or something like that. He's probably not going to get to that 13 to 15 touchdown mark again because of the type of player he is. He's not a big red zone threat. He's not a huge, big bodied guy near the red zone. So I think he's going to be very good, but I think his ceiling is more like top 5, not top 1.
Yeah, you hit on the touchdown regression. That should be positive this year. I definitely see an uptick in touchdowns. I don't see him being one of the top touchdown, scorers among wide receivers. And then the other thing is what's missing, what some of these other elite wideouts have, no disrespect whatsoever to the Sun God, but like a Jamar Chase, a Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown, the chance to get those long, big hitters, those home run plays, those 70-yard touchdowns, those deep scores, this is not his game. He relies a little bit too much on volume, and he'll get it, but he doesn't have what it takes, I think, to be the number one overall wide receiver. Now, this guy might, but we have to see it happen with a new quarterback, decent quarterback, I guess, in Aaron Rodgers. Does Garrett Wilson get there? A lot of people are totally split on this one.
Yeah, I think it's too soon for Garrett Wilson to be the wide receiver one. I mean, Justin Jefferson was not the wide receiver one his second year in the NFL, and Garrett Wilson, with all due respect, is not on the trajectory that Justin Jefferson is on, not even close. I think Garrett Wilson will be great this year, top 10, maybe, again, like the Amon-Ra St. Brown, top 5, probably his ceiling, probably more like top 10. But wide receiver one, that feels too much for a guy going into year 2.
Well, for me, it's not the age. It's not really, it's not the talent, obviously. And even if Aaron Rodgers isn't what he used to be, I think he could definitely support a guy who's an elite wideout still. I think it's just the offense itself. We know this team has a really good defense, and now adding Dalvin Cook to go with Breece Hall, they're not going to need to throw it a ton because they just shouldn't be behind in games, and they shouldn't have to force the ball out. Look, Aaron Rodgers wasn't brought in there to throw it 40 times a game. He was brought in to manage, to not turn the ball over because that's his best asset, really. And I think Garrett Wilson just maybe, even though he does have that big playability, which I just hinted at with his previous players, I don't know, the volume is going to be there for him. So he'll have some huge weeks. I think he is an elite wideout, but yeah, not in this situation this year for him as far as top wide receiver. We got some more wideouts to talk about, but first, we want to mention something that you might be interested in.
FlockFantasy.com/endgame is the ultimate cheat code for your fantasy football season. Put your fantasy football skills to the test by playing redraft against myself and Pierre. Battle us to try to take home cash prizes. And you can ace your draft like a pro with our exclusive video draft course to help you dominate your fantasy drafts. Gain the edge with our top-notch draft rankings plus our weekly in-season rankings. And get access to our secret knowledge with our bonus articles and videos that you cannot find anywhere else. And as a special bonus, you can show off your fantasy skills in style by wearing one of our classy Endgame t-shirts for free just by being a member. Sign up now at flockfantasy.com/endgame and get an amazing 30% off your subscription.
All right, so now we're going to talk about some wide receivers that still could have a chance to be the top wide receiver, but they're long shots. Let's call them dark horses. All right, now what about a guy who didn't even play last year and is on a team that he had not played for yet? That is Calvin Ridley in Jacksonville. Do you think the Trevor Lawrence and Ridley connection is going to make it happen?
I mean, on the one side, we've seen him, potentially be the number one wide receiver or close to it. But man, there's a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. You got Christian Kirk, you got Evan Ingram, you even got Zay Jones. I do think Trevor Lawrence will be great this year. I could see him going for mid 4,000 yards, 30 to 35 touchdowns, but it's not all going to go to Calvin Ridley. it's going to be spread out a little bit. I think Calvin Ridley will be great. I think he has top 10 upside, maybe even top 5 upside. But number one wide receiver just feels like a bit too much for Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, I was probably a little too pessimistic about Ridley, early this offseason. I do think that he could be in line for his best season, but again, my issue is, well, you mentioned the competition for targets, but also this guy's not really in his prime anymore. And when he was the main attraction in Atlanta, he had a team that just threw the ball a ton, a quarterback in Matt Ryan, who threw the ball to his wideouts first and foremost. And Ridley, once Julio Jones was out, he was pretty much it. It's not the situation here. So I think that he will have a great season, but yeah, it's a little too much of a long shot for me. Now, what about Chris Olave in New Orleans? Another guy going with a new quarterback in town. It's hard to say how this is going to play out, but he doesn't seem to have too much competition unless you assume Michael Thomas is actually going to stay healthy.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of say the same thing I said with Garrett Wilson here. I just think year 2 wide receiver, it's still in the development stage. It's really rare. Like the Justin Jeffersons and Jamar Chases, what they do in year 2 is very rare. It's more like year 3, year 4 where we see these guys really explode. So I think Chris Olave is going to be great, but I think he's still a year or 2 away from being the potential wide receiver 1. So not going to happen this year.
I'm going to agree here. Nothing to do with Olave himself. It's just the fact the new quarterback here, a lot of new pieces just in general to this offense. And I think it's going to take time. I mean, it takes time for these things to happen, to gel, for the Carr-Olave connection to really come to fruition. He'll be great, but I don't think he'll be the greatest. And then I guess we have to mention a guy who's been the greatest wide receiver in fantasy the last several years. He was the overall wide receiver 1 a couple of times. That's Davante Adams. And you saw what happened last year, but that was with Derek Carr. And now we're going to get, I guess, Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, again, I think Adams will be good this year. I think he has top 10 upside, maybe top 5 upside if things really break right. But it's hard to make a case for him as the wide receiver 1. Even last year with almost 190 targets, just getting peppered with targets from Derek Carr, he was still, I say only in air quotes, but he was still only the wide receiver 3. Is he going to be better than he was last year with Jimmy G? Now a year older, a 31-year-old wide receiver? Highly unlikely. So top 10, maybe top 5, but wide receiver 1, those days feel like they're over.
Yeah, I mean, the fact we put him in this tier just tells you what we think. And, still solid. Not his own fault. It's just that's the way this team is built right now. It's not going to be Adams first, Adams second, Adams third, and, look somewhere else if you absolutely have to. He went over there to join Derek Carr, and then Carr, was let go. So it's just not going to be the same. The quarterback-receiver connection means so much. It's going to take time, but also I just don't trust Jimmy Garoppolo to support anybody as the top wide receiver. You don't have to have the number 1 overall wide receiver to have a guy who can help you win the chip. These are some wide receivers who could be league winners for you.